Folks, welcome to the first Friday of the new year, and welcome to the Freedom from the Press podcast. My name is Jason Robertson, and I'm here with my partner in crime.
Happy 2024, Todd Peterson. Good to have you with us today as we talk about equity and equality and really break this down for you folks because you're hearing equity a lot again. So let's talk about what that is today, Jason.
Yeah, I got to say, before we get into the show, Todd and I wanted to give a little bit of a disclaimer because we had this episode we were going to do because I don't know if everybody was paying attention, but a couple days ago, they started dropping Epstein documents. And for those who follow us on our Substack, the AmericanTribune.news, we've been deep diving into the Epstein stuff, and our team there has done a great job. We've put out about 7 pieces. I guarantee it's stuff you haven't seen before. I guarantee it's stuff you haven't heard about before. And we were all set to go, and we're like, oh, we really want to do this. We put out a great article this week about Pizzagate that just dropped this morning. And then we're like, we broadcast this podcast on multiple platforms that are going to hit the delete button. And true story, the other night, I was watching the Tim Pool podcast. My wife and I enjoy watching that. And he was going through the Epstein revelations. And a half hour in, all of a sudden, boom, black screen. And folks, so I'd encourage you to go check out our written content on the AmericanTribune.news. Going to be some stuff that blows your mind. But Todd, what do you think? Anything to add on that?
You know, nothing was overly shocking. I think we knew we'd see some big names on there. We knew the rich and powerful had consorted on that island and other places that Epstein owned here. So for me, Jason, the most disappointing thing is that we've been sitting on this, and by we, I mean the FBI and other intelligence agencies have been sitting on this for years. Now it's getting released to us, but it just reminds me of the fact that there are rich and powerful people in place that know this and aren't doing anything about it. And so we shall see if justice is brought to the individuals named here, but I'm not going to hold my breath.
Yeah, and Todd really drilled home a good point. 2019, they raided Epstein Island. Tapes, videos, all of it. Federal law enforcement is in possession of that. And while they've arrested and tracked down every grandma that was at the Capitol on January 6, 2020, 2021, they have not arrested a single person from all those tapes, files, documents. It's just really tragic.
Sometimes it feels like they're mocking us, if I'm being honest there.
Yeah, exactly.
We all know the same thing. We all see what they're doing and they're not doing. They'll go after J6 grannies for the rest of the decade here. Will they go after some of the names in the documents that were unsealed this week? I doubt it.
Doubt it. But like I say, folks, go check out our Substack. You're going to find some great information that's going to blow your mind on there. But the other thing that was really cropping up this week, and a lot of it started with the head of Harvard, the president of Harvard, getting fired. And Todd, do you want to kind of give a little overview for the audience of kind of what that whole story was?
Yeah, so fast. I mean, she's a DEI hire. We'll get to that in a second here. But what really got this train rolling was following the attacks in Israel on October 7th here, Congress brings forward some of these university presidents to talk about some rising cases of anti-Semitism on campus. During that line of questioning there, Harvard's president, Penn's president, some other people were asked about these cases on campus and essentially saying, do you condone this anti-Semitic rhetoric, some of the protests that are occurring on campus there? Talking about maybe even supporting genocide of the Jewish population or the Jewish state. We saw a lot of this pro-Hamas, pro-Palestine stuff come out. And Harvard's president, with the others, was basically silent on the matter, quite loudly in her silence, saying that I condone, in essence, this anti-Semitic rhetoric and behavior. And that did not land very well. And a side note, it really put the left in a pickle here because now all of a sudden you've got this anti-Semitic twist among Democrats there, and you talk about that hierarchy, the totem of oppressors, oppressed. But now here we are, where it's because Harvard's president was specifically a black woman, and she, in essence, supported what was happening, and they fired her. Now she gets to play the race card too. So we're in all sorts of a pickle.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's like they filled their woke bingo card on this thing. You've got Israel Hamas, you've got race stuff, you've got college higher education, and it's interesting. So this gal, after she was at the congressional hearing and wouldn't disavow. So first there was three university presidents there. The one in Penn, white lady, she was gone. They're like, oh, we're done with you. Harvard was getting pressure to get rid of this lady. And then people started looking into this lady. And this is where the equity versus equality argument comes in. And that's going to be the foundation of this week's episode, talking about how equity is destroying our country, how it's un-American, how it leads us down a bad path. But this gal that they put in charge of Harvard, it turned out she was a plagiarist. She had contributed very little academically. She had contributed very little in research or any of that thing. And they were finding a large majority of her papers had huge swaths of them that were plagiarized from other sources.
Yeah, a little bit of Command C, Command V on your MacBook if you're typing out a thesis here. So, Jason, what I hear you saying is here's a woman who might not have had the intellectual capacity, academic rigor to achieve her post, but she had a couple other things going for her in this modern age of race, gender, sexuality. She checked a lot of the right boxes off at a very left-leaning Harvard institution. She's a Black woman. Let's get her up there. She's qualified to be president because she has Black skin and the right genitalia.
Right. Yeah. And actually, Robert here in the chat, he hits the nail on the head. Equity is Marxist. Equal outcome for all.
We are getting to that, Robert. Great point.
I was going to say, as we're going to talk about people getting their job for non-qualifying conditions, Todd, where we got to start with this, what video we got to play.
When I think of who is the most least qualified, let's put it that way, least qualified person in a high position, I think of no other than Kamala Harris. I don't know about you, Jason.
No, I got to say, when you look at all the Democrats that they could have chosen to be vice president, they wanted a Black female. That's racist as heck. You can't say that. You can't pick somebody based on that. And then they looked and they found they didn't have a very strong crop. And so who do they land on? Kamala Harris. Now, if you don't think they hate Americans, you would think that would be enough for them to hide from this and try to act like she was qualified. But early on in her reign as vice president, she actually was up on the crowd giving a speech. This would be a great flashback for folks because she's still wearing her COVID mask. So, Todd, should we fire up the video?
Let's listen to Kamala. Sorry, everyone in advance.
Equality suggests often everybody should get the same thing. Well, that often assumes everybody started out in the same place, as opposed to equity, which is everyone should end up in the same place. And if you then understand not everybody started out in the same place, you understand some people need more. So we all end up in the same place.
There is a lot to unpack there. Just ask yourself, though, what does she mean by the end? So many different directions, but what do they mean by end up in the same place? Like, just ask her that question to begin with. Jason, where should we all end up?
Right. If you think of America, we had all these folks, mainly in Europe, that just wanted a chance to come over, prove their merit, prove their mettle, and they want to build their own life, raise their family. And to be honest, Todd, I want things that are different than you, that are different than our other partners in the American Tribune, that are different than all the people watching this podcast. There's no way we're all going to end up in the same spot. I might work more. I might work less. I might have a different goal. This whole notion that we end up in the same place is ridiculous.
And forced, by the way. You and I have different interests, skill sets, backgrounds, experiences, different outlooks in the next 10 years of what we want our life to look like here. Jason, my own story here, I'm a twin brother. I grew up in the exact same household, had the same set of parents, same set of rules, same education, same experiences. We went to college together and roomed together. We were very close. In no way have we achieved the same life in adulthood here. Because at the end of the day, despite sharing DNA, parents, education, sports, we're our own individual person and we have our own aspirations and our own interests, and we've done our own thing. And now for Kamala Harris to say that every American is going to end up in the exact same place by government design, get out of here.
Right. Well, and then it gets even worse because you're saying people start out in different places. Well, welcome to life. People start out in different places. I started out dirt poor in a trailer park in southwestern Minnesota. with a hardworking dad who taught me values and work ethic and problem solving. And I took those skills out in the world. My sister, same thing. She wanted a different life path. She got kind of a cushy desk job at the Mayo Clinic, and that was her path. And I went on to work in corporate America, become an entrepreneur. We wanted different things out of life. We work different things out of life. So we get different things out of life. That's the beauty of America. She has a great life. She's super happy with her life. I'm super happy with mine. And that's how it should be. Oh my God. And the chat is just exploding on the different platforms today. Thanks so much. We've got Karen, socialism. I'm sick of this witch. And we got Mike, who nails it on the head. They chose to Kamala to keep Joe.
That's a common theory. I'm with Mike on that one here, because Joe Biden had no business staying in office for 4 years, but she was the best insurance policy ever, because here we are. Joe Biden is going to run for re-election in 2024. He had no business making it this far.
Oh, absolutely. And then shout out to Carrie. Good morning to you too, Carrie.
Good morning, Carrie.
Hey. But it's fascinating. Now, Todd, when did this whole equity movement from the Biden administration start?
Jason, you're not going to like to hear this, but day one. So, folks, equity, this is how it happens. It stews in academia for a while when you have these professors with nothing better to do. They have a lot of free time to think about the next absurd thing, because they have to leapfrog. If you're going to get ahead in academia, you have to do something new and different. So it stews there for a while. It percolates down to the undergrads. These undergrads go out into the workforce. And so, Jason, just to kind of talk about this for a second, too, we used to think that the real world would mature people and grow them up, because you would leave the confines of your bubble in college and go out, and then the workforce would, reinforce some different values. That's not the case, because we've had enough time pass now from these people leaving college to then getting into positions of leadership and work, and it just reinforces that nonsense here. So when you talk about the real world changing people, that's not the case anymore. In terms of equity in the Biden administration, I hate to say this, folks, day one on Joe Biden's inauguration, I'm going to read to you this executive order here. And actually, let's pop this up to us for a second, too, if we can.
Yeah, I'll drop the link in the chat.
I'll drop the link in the chat there. Oh, we're going nuts for a second. On day one, January of 2021, they define equity in an entire mission here. They have an executive order on advancing racial equity and the support for underserved communities through the federal government. So your tax dollars, the mighty federal government, is going to mandate equity as we talk about that. But here's what they define equity as. And it's a long one, I apologize, but important to get through. The term equity means the consistent and systematic, fair, just, and impartial treatment of all individuals, including individuals who belong to underserved communities that have been denied such treatment: Black, Latino, Indigenous, Native American, Asian American, Pacific Islander, person of color, member of religious minority, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer, person with disabilities, person who lives in rural areas, and persons otherwise adversely affected by persistent poverty or inequality. I don't know about you, Jason, but it's the last word of that entire definition, inequality, that jumps out, because there's inequality everywhere. That's life. And so for them to say, if we find an inequality, that means we get to come in with the federal government and make sure it's not unequal anymore. They can literally do anything they want under this power to ensure that Blacks, women's, minorities, anyone under their umbrella at the moment that they're trying to pander to can get access.
Yeah, and it's fascinating if you think about that. I mean, raise your hand in the chat if you work for a big company, and there's a whole hierarchy in the company. There's people that have different skill sets, that are at different degrees effective of their job. Some people are great working in the shop floor. Some people are good doing the accounting. Some people have leadership skills and move into management. And I'm not saying that there's not some selection bias that goes into that. To be honest, it's usually less about race or that sort of thing, and it's more about like who you know or who you're friends with, that sort of quid quo pro, so to speak. But you look at Amazon, I mean, so you're saying equality, so everybody at Amazon is going to end up in the same place. Like, how does this even work? It's insane.
Absolutely insane. This might be a great time to bring up this Elon Musk and Mark Cuban debacle. So Mark Cuban is selling the Dallas Mavericks. He's getting out at the right time, because the NBA brand is just tanking due to their leadership here. But Mark Cuban is just some woke idiot whose brain got melted under the Trump administration. And he's saying the Dallas Mavericks, and here's why DEI is so good, and I hire based on diversity quotas in the front office there. And Elon Musk comes back to him on Twitter, getting tens of millions of views, saying, when are you going to hire some short, white Asian guy to play on your basketball team? Jason, that's the end of DEI. critical race theory, equity. That should stop the conversation cold right there, because it is so obvious these NBA owners have no interest in hiring a short, white, untalented, right? They're not going to do it because they're out there to win money. They're going to have a meritocracy on the basketball court. But when it comes to the front office, fine, because no one cares and you can feel good about yourself. But that was a wonderful rejoinder from Elon Musk, and that's exactly how you should handle that conversation.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because for those, I don't know if you're like me, Todd, we've talked about it a little bit on here. I'm a huge Star Wars fan, right?
Love it.
Love it. Star Wars, the original George Lucas, like shout out, one of the greatest trilogies ever. Return of the Jedi. I mean, I'm in. You know, they made the prequel trilogy little silly, but still pretty good show. You know, Rise of the Sith, I thought was excellent. And then they started putting out just trash. The new trilogy of the Star Wars movies with Rey, it was the most convoluted. How do we put a strong female character in? And you would think Disney, which this year, I was reading something the other day on the American Tribune, like 8 out of 10 of their releases have been mega ultra nuclear bombs this year in movies. They're rehashing these ideas, only they're making them woke, and nobody's going to see them. They're losing millions of dollars. So then I heard they were going to announce who's going to be in charge of the new Star Wars. And I'm like, okay, finally, let's get somebody good who's qualified, who knows the content, who can build that brand. Todd, did they hire a Star Wars nerd to be in charge of Star Wars?
I don't know anything about this woman, but if I had to guess, she's never watched the movies. She probably actively hates the movies, but she has a platform to advance her own political agenda.
She is a Pakistani author, journalist who wrote a couple of different movies. She speaks out against making men feel uncomfortable because we need strong women values, strong women characters. She did a press conference where she's talking about that. And I'm thinking to myself, Disney has to be the stupidest organization I've ever seen. Because who do you think goes and sees Star Wars? Go to a freaking Star Wars convention. Do you think that's full of a bunch of blue-haired feminists who want equal rights? Or is it full of a bunch of dudes? Guys who just want to watch a good lightsaber fight and a space battle. It's the craziest ever. So they hire this gal, they bring her up, and she gives a speech about how we need to feminize the Star Wars universe. So congratulations, we're going to have Return of the Menopause or something. I don't even know what they're going to do with it. Destruction of
I saw a Babylon Bee meme. I hope we can say this on Facebook, but they talked about this female lead would return to the dark side on a monthly basis.
Oh my God, that's excellent.
No, but here's equity in action. So this woman, probably not qualified to create an ad for a commercial, a small-time commercial. She knows nothing about Star Wars. And so you want to talk about her or Harvard's former president. In the case of Harvard, probably not qualified to lead a university. In this woman's case, probably not qualified to make a Star Wars movie. Kamala Harris, who we just showed, probably not qualified to be second in line for the White House and running the greatest country in the world. But this is what equity does. It says, we are going to promote you based on this mythological sense of like, you are oppressed. And Jason, they don't see the irony in all of this, because as they always and forever will promote a woman of color to this, or the first Black woman on the Supreme Court to this, or this and that. By definition, that is the most privileged person right now, because they get to jump the line in front of everyone else that is more qualified. So as they continue to lie with this notion of equity, they're actually doing the very thing they're accusing us of doing, which is, of course, par for the course for leftists. They'll always accuse you of the thing that they are doing.
Well, and it's remarkable, too, the logic. Like, I like to be kind of a logical guy. 2 + 2 is 4.
I could think so.
You know, you follow the line straight ahead. And when it comes to anything racial, I always say to myself, if you switch the race, would you be okay with it? And if you switch the gender, would you be okay with it? It's just kind of a good rule of thumb, right? Good guideline. And when Joe Biden came out and said, I want a Black female for vice president, I'm thinking to myself, how many of those different triggers could you interchange and have that be socially acceptable? And if the answer is all of them, you're doing it right. And if the answer is not all of them, you're doing it wrong. I mean, if Joe Biden would have come out and said, I need a heterosexual white male to be my vice president, the world would have exploded. They would have hauled that guy off, and the left would have demolished him. But why is it okay then to say I want a black female who's going to be in charge?
I'm going to nominate the first black woman to the Supreme Court. I'm going to hire the first black lesbian woman to be the press secretary. I'm going to do all these things and it gets celebrated. But Jason, to your point, this is the most discriminatory practice and way of thinking. And we have now become conditioned, I'm afraid, especially the people that vote for this, conditioned to accept that it is wonderful, not just okay, but wonderful to actively discriminate against everybody.
And now, if you think of the legality of this too, as we kind of go down that path of what's okay. So, day one to understand what happened, folks. And it's funny. I remember sitting there watching some of the transition stuff with my wife, and Joe Biden talked about equity being the foundation of his policies. He signs an executive order, which is essentially kind of like putting a law in place. It's not quite the same reach, but same effect. And he instructed all of his federal agencies to bake equity into every policy and practice they do. And he defines equity by adjusting the starting point for all of the folks with any diversity label. And he expands this to everything: age, race, sex, LGBTQ, you name it.
Anytime there's an inequality is the language in there. He can apply that to anything he wants to.
Right. And so all of a sudden, instead of saying who are the best people to run the country in his administration, who are the best people to fill these roles, you're giving qualifiers to people based on characteristics, on personal characteristics that have nothing to do with their effectiveness of running their job. And I mean, case in point, you mentioned KJP. Todd, how many hours of KJP things have you watched in your life?
I've seen enough of her to last a lifetime. And she goes out there and she either intentionally lies every day or has no idea what she's talking about. I don't know how you defend I don't know how anyone is press secretary for Joe Biden, but she is certainly, other than able to talk in circles, not qualified to do that job.
Yeah, and it's remarkable too. If you think that's probably one of the most important jobs in the government, is who's going to go out and communicate effectively and truthfully to the American people. And who do you put out there? You put out somebody that was clearly hired. And here's the question that always bugs me. Let's say you're Jean Pierre. Let's say you're the first black woman Supreme Court justice. How do you feel about yourself at the end of the day, knowing that you were picked because you were a black female?
Does that make you feel better about yourself or worse? Do you always have in the back of your mind, Jason, this nagging thought that I'm only here because of these unrelated, immutable characteristics that I actually don't have any control over and don't really matter? I'm here because I happen to be a black woman, not because I'm a great jurist, like justice, right?
Right.
How do you feel good about yourself knowing that?
Right. And if you think of what message that sends, so you find yourself in front of the Supreme Court. You're thinking like, we are supposed to have our best and brightest minds in the world up there who are going to understand the Constitution. And then do you remember in her confirmation hearing, Todd, what question they asked her that she couldn't answer?
Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee famously asked her, "What is a woman?" And because she is a justice and not a biologist, she had no answer for that. And she said that with a straight face. I'm not a biologist, so I can't answer that question.
Right. I mean, think of that. And now that I don't think was so much because she lacked the intellect. She lacked the courage to stand up to the woke mob and say, like, yeah, no, a woman is a biological female. But it kind of underscores the point how the left continues to tie itself in knots. So if you look at federal policy, so I think we
Jason, can I really hit that point? So
Yeah.
She is the first black woman. We're celebrating her being the first black woman, but then she can't even define what a woman is. So it's kind of hard to, right, connect those dots there. How do you celebrate being the first of that if you don't even know what that is?
Right. And it's funny too. I mean, talking about her tenure, she is above reproach, which is what happened with Harvard too. So when Harvard found out that their president they hired, the black female, was a plagiarist, And I think at last count, it was over 20 cases of papers where she was caught plagiarizing. When they fired her, all of a sudden the race baiters come out and they said, you didn't fire her because of her job performance, because she has horrible opinions about stopping anti-Semitism on campus, and also because she plagiarizes her writing. But and Todd, what do they come out and accuse it of?
Oh, you're a racist if you want to get her fired. Of course.
Right.
You're a
There was actually
racist. You don't want a black woman to be in a position of power because you're afraid of her.
Right. There was actually an AP article that came out the day after and said the new tool, the new racist tool of the alt-right, plagiarism. Somehow plagiarism has become an awful thing that
authenticity is now it's now white privilege or white supremacy to want truth and honesty in your work.
Right. Oh, here we go. We got Joanne chiming in. I think she hit the nail on the head. People need to be pissed that unqualified individuals are being placed in positions because
absolutely, Joanne. Everyone should be upset by this. I don't care how woke you are. There are some people out there that say I would gladly give up. Well, hold on a second, Jason. Here's the other virtue signal. They all say that these should be offered to people in the underserved, oppressed, whatever Marxist language you want to use. They all say that should be the case, but ask any of them in their current position at work right now to say, would you be willing to give up your job to an XYZ right now? Here's the box, pack up your things, go home.
I'm thinking the answer would be no, Todd.
I'm guessing they wouldn't do that. Joe Biden is still president. He really believes in equity, but he hasn't given the reins to Kamala yet.
You bring up a great point. If Joe Biden really believed in equity, wouldn't he step aside and let a black female serve the last year of his term?
One would think. I mean, if you really believed in this, would you vote for Joe Biden if you wanted to get not another white male in the White House? You're just propping up white supremacy. We've only had, well, I take it back. We had Barack Obama too. He had another Teflon president.
Right. Do we go Barack Obama? I can't go Barack Obama.
I can't do it.
Oh my gosh. But anyways, so the point that we're trying to make here, and we've told a lot of funny stories, is that in America, if you look, so in the back of your head, I'm going tinfoil hat.
Wouldn't be a show without tinfoil.
Wouldn't be a show without tinfoil. The fact of the matter is, folks, that we are under attack by Marxists, people that have a significantly different worldview than we do, people that think that government should replace God, people that think that government should replace the institutions that we have, people that think they're going to create this communist utopia, even though, hey, Todd, how many times has communism worked in the history of mankind?
Are you asking if it's been done correctly or not yet?
Has it ever worked in a way that hasn't ended with mass destruction?
I can't think of any.
No. So communism doesn't work. It always ends bad. It always results in failure. These are now the policies that the president of the United States signed into effect day one.
And make no mistake, equity is just a fancy buzzword for communism. There is no difference.
Yeah, and actually, if you think about the concept of everybody ending up in the same place, how's that even going to happen? What does that look like, Todd?
What does that look like?
You know, it's
I'll
fascinating.
tell you what it looks like, Jason. You and I are in a bread line while Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are living a life of luxury in the White House there. So make no mistake, it is not everyone's in the same place. It's that a select few get some really nice lifestyles and the rest of us get scraps.
Yeah, and
we are allowed to live.
I've told this story before. There was a college professor in his class that said, we're going to try communism. And he said, at the start of the semester, he said, this class is going to be communist based. We're all going to get the same grade. And we're going to be equitable in that. We're all going to do the same thing. So the first test comes out. A bunch of people work hard. A bunch of people slacked. The whole group produced a score of a B. And the people that slacked, didn't contribute, didn't study, they thought communism was amazing. because instead of getting a D or an F or that sort of thing, they pull a B. This is great. Now, your performers that worked hard, studied hard, they were the ones grinding away on a Friday night when the other kids were out partying. They looked at their score. Todd, if they worked that hard and their work was A work and they got a B, how do you think they felt?
Well, I think the next time they're going to put in B work, because why do more than they're going to get back?
It's funny. Second test. The high end, the low end still does nothing. The high end puts in B work. Now the class gets a C.
I see where this is going.
Right. So now the slackers are kind of annoyed at the workers saying like, hey, you guys should have pulled these scores up. How come you guys slack? Meanwhile, the workers are looking at the slackers and said, I just did the same thing you did. What are you talking about? So then the third test comes up. Total test score. Take a guess, Todd.
Is it down to a D?
It was down to a D.
Imagine that.
Right. By the fifth test score, the class was failing and the class failed the semester. What are the takeaways from the study? When people have no incentive to work extra hard and do extra well, guess what happens? They don't work extra hard and do extra well. Conversely, when you reward people for doing nothing, sitting on their butts, and just getting the same benefit at those work hard, that reinforces their behavior. So they have zero incentive to get up, stand up, and go do more things. So ultimately, if you look at why does communism not fail, it fails by human nature. And whether anybody watching this or listening to this likes to admit it or not, we're all somewhat selfish. We want for us and our family and our loved ones and our community and our church, but it's kind of in that order. Where if there's no direct financial incentive or incentive in general for you to continue to push hard and do more, by nature, you're not going to do more, you know?
And Jason, the added theme is that the professor collected his salary. I don't think he really cared with what the class grades were, A's, B's, C's. He still got his cushy salary while there was class warfare among the doers and the not doers. And so there is your elite class. They honestly don't care what's happening down with the peons because they get theirs still.
Right. And if you look at that in business or industry, because one of the things we hear is like, oh, we need to tax the rich more. We need to tax corporations. And I think there's something with corporations where I think corporate greed is bad and they manipulate politicians. But if you look on just an average basis, just to talk real world, let's say you're an entrepreneur. Let's say you made $100,000 this year. Todd, $100,000, that's a pretty good amount of money, isn't it?
I mean, it sounds good until you get government involved.
Till you get government involved. But if you look at the federal tax rate, you know, you're going to pay 12% Social Security tax. We're from the state of Minnesota. You're going to pay 9% for that. But effectively, you're going to pay about 11 or 12% over that first 100,000 of your income to taxes. So that's not so bad, right? You're still getting 70, 80%, there's 60, 70% of your take.
And you're doing better than most. I don't want to sound glib about $100,000. You're doing okay.
Now, here's what's remarkable. If you go from $100,000 to $150,000, what happens to your tax rate?
Well, you just went into the next bracket. So you thought you got a $50,000 raise? Not the case.
Not the case. Turns out the federal government's going to increase your taxes. So on that $50,000, they're going to take 26% of it. Plus 12%, plus 10% because we're in the state of Minnesota. So that $50,000 you worked extra hard to get, you know, you're an entrepreneur, you're a salesman, you're whatever your job is, you work hard to push from 100 to 150. All of a sudden, you're only going to walk with $20,000. And we're not talking super rich people. Somebody make $150,000, like they're doing well, but they're not like rolling up in the Beamer. You know what I mean? But if you think of that person, how much harder are you going to work to push from $100,000 to $150,000 a year if there's no financial incentive for it?
I mean, human nature. Why are you going to grind it out to write a check to the government? 25. Why am I going to work for 75 cents on the dollar? Like, you're doing the math in your head there. 100% of my effort for 75% returns. Like, I'll do something else.
Right. So that's ultimately where equity brings us is you get to this point, because what's going to continue to happen to pay for equity? Todd mentioned the bread line. Todd, how's that path going to go for us as we continue insinuating this woke ideology of equity across all platforms? What is that going to look like in execution?
Well, we have a couple things. You're going to breed a lot of resentment. And I think you see the resentment brewing in a sense that a lot of Donald Trump support, Jason, I would argue, comes from the fact that people just want a fair shake in life. They're tired of two-tier justice. They don't want to see the Biden crime family get off the hook. They don't want to see the Epstein client list go unpunished. They don't want to see and look, if you're on unemployment, you're on food stamps. My wife grew up on that for a little bit of time. Like, you can be a hardworking person and just need a little support in life. God love you. This is not about you right now. But if you're just going to be a perpetual moocher off the system there because of human nature and you have no motivation to work hard for yourself, or you're lazy, or it's coming your way, or maybe I'm going to take advantage of equity right now. I check off a certain box. I'm going to bump myself ahead. People inherently see that unfairness. And so you're going to breed a lot of resentment towards people that are taking advantage of the system in a way that is not mutually beneficial to all of us here. From a financial standpoint, Jason, we got to talk about this number too as we're talking finances. At a certain point, the rich are going to run out of money. Right now, do you know what the top 1% of U.S. taxpayers contribute already to the federal government?
A lot.
It's over 40%. The top 10% of U.S. taxpayers pay over 90%. So, Jason, when the U.S. government takes in, let's say, $5 trillion, I'm making a number up, 90% of that $5 trillion, so what, $4.5 trillion, comes from just 10% of the U.S. population. The next time someone says the rich aren't paying their fair share, or we all need to contribute more, I don't know about you. I think they're already paying their fair share. They're already paying too much. The income tax is theft. They shouldn't be paying anything, but they are definitely paying enough right now. So that's what's going to happen. Eventually, they're not going to pay, or they're not going to have any more money to pay. And then I don't know how you support all these wonderful federal programs that require billions and billions of dollars because the money just ain't there.
Well, and it's fascinating too, because I mentioned I grew up poor when I first moved to the Twin Cities. I lived in a very urban inner city area in Minneapolis and worked hard. And it was funny because it was kind of a good learning for me as a poor white dude. I had more in common with the poor black dudes and poor black ladies. Like, they were just like the folks from my trailer park. We listened to different music, we ate a little different food, but at the end of the day, we had a lot more in common than I would with an affluent white person. I mean, you want to see me uncomfortable? Take me to a fancy restaurant with a bunch of snooty people. Like, I have very little in common with them and very little to talk about. But it was interesting in those neighborhoods, because as you really got to know what was going on and kind of what the outcome of this equity initiative was before it was even called that, is they were building in these ceilings for these urban communities. So they would have a baseline of subsistence living. Let's say it was the equivalent of 30, 40, 50,000 a year that the government was providing through different aid packages. So for them, if you went into those inner cities to hire, so like, true story, I'd go to hire a manager, I would pay more in an urban area than I would in a suburb, because in the urban area, it's like you can sit home at free making 40 grand a year. Or if I need to come to work, how much is it worth? Is it worth $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, $100,000 more a year? In many cases, we would hire entry-level starting managers at like $60K a year, whereas in the suburbs, we would pay them $50K, just because we were competing in the inner city against that built-in safety network, they called it, but it was just communism in a different form.
Yeah, man, if you don't think some of these rulers don't hate you enough, if you are, I mean, we can talk about the urban black community, how the Democrat Party has just utterly devastated those communities through their welfare programs, disincentivizing men to man up and stay with the mothers of their children, and going and being responsible for work. I mean, this is not an indictment against the entire community, but you can see policies have wreaked havoc in the inner city precisely for what you're saying, Jason, there, that they have disincentivized a lot of activity. And you can say it all started off with good intentions, but it doesn't take a lot of thinking forward to see how this is going to be ruinous.
Right. And actually, you bring up a great point. That was another topic we were going to talk about, which is the open borders. And I've got to say, I don't know about you, but I find it absolutely delicious what's happening in the urban. I feel really bad for the urban cities and for the people on the street that this is affecting. But for those who haven't been following the news, Greg Abbott and a few other governors have been sending migrants, all the illegal aliens that have been coming into America. They've been sending them to these inner city areas. Um, Todd, how do you think that's been going for him?
You know, Jason, we talk about when reality meets leftism in Democrat voting. Solid Democrat voting base in these cities. And then suddenly you see these same voters rising up because guess what? Illegal immigrants compete for resources. They compete for jobs in some cases. They compete for your apartment building. You guys aren't getting along very well. And we can see Democrat voters rising up against city council, local leadership, saying, we can't take this anymore. We don't want these people here. And they sound a lot like Trump voters, Jason, except they're not quite admitting that.
Right. Well, and it's fascinating. Today we dropped a great article on the AmericanTribune.com where Governor Adams, who's been an outspoken advocate, saying you need to stop sending people to New York City. And it's like, what do you mean you're a sanctuary city? Like, you created these rules, you support the open borders. Why shouldn't we send them to you? And frankly, the citizens who were idiotic enough to buy this line of bullshit that they were being fed, they're like, oh yeah, like closed border. I mean, I remember when closed borders were racist. But now reality is slapping them in the face because they're sending these migrants to New York. They're giving them cash, federal government, your and my money is going to them. It's not building us roads. It's not, protecting borders. It's not doing it's not going into your Social Security. Raise your hand if you're on Social Security, you don't get enough money, but we're going to pay from the federal government to these migrants. Then we're going to put them up in hotels. In some cases, we're kicking American citizens out of the hotels to house an illegal immigrant. And it becomes kind of the crux of what happens when you think of that good intentions. I mean, good intention, we want to help give people a nice place to land and welcome people to the country. The reality is it just doesn't work. You can't take in an unlimited number of people because you only have so many resources. And New York City is finding out those resources are running dry. When it's food, shelter, housing, money, whatever the scenario is. Now, the citizens of New York are actually encountering where they're cutting back police force, fire, trash pickup, city services, schools. And that's because the fact of the matter, whether you like to admit it or not, there's only a finite amount of resources. So you can only spread it so many ways. And how does that tie into equity and inclusion and equality that we were talking about? Equity is a similar drain on civilization that those illegal immigrants are in New York City. Equity means, if you look, Todd and I are business partners. We've got 4 partners. The more the 4 of us produce, the better it is for us and our family, first of all. By the way, support the AmericanTribune.com, the AmericanTribune.news. We appreciate folks that support us, subscribe to our work. But we also produce revenue for the federal government, right, Todd?
Too much if you're asking me, but yes, so much money that we make, we get to write a check. And Jason, I just lost thousands of dollars for payroll taxes just to the state of Minnesota this month as we're getting geared up for tax season. So the more I work, the more Uncle Sam makes.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. And then and then for us, if resources were allocated to us, if we brought somebody on our team, Todd, because they were a gay, black, transsexual that thought they were a kitten, and our company produces less, what happens to the American Tribune?
Well, we make less money. And eventually, if we keep hiring folks like that contribute nothing to the business model, then we go under.
Right. And what happens with all that money that we're generating, that we're writing to the federal government? Is that going to go
weird?
up or
Do you
down?
mean they lose out on that money too?
Right. So if you look at our partnership group on the American Tribune, we've got our 4 partners that are running it. We're all producing, we're all working hard, we're all producing resources for the federal government. Those resources get redistributed for different things that are going to have communal benefit. I mean, the federal government, taxation's theft, but if you want to go on that path, when we start hiring people based on immutable characteristics instead of their ability to execute our business model, we're going to end up with things that are ineffective. A lot of these industries that have been leading into this affirmative action, if you think airlines, if you think transit, if you think a lot of these jobs and you look at jobs or businesses that are struggling, Disney, we talked about. Why is Disney going broke? They're producing bad content, yes, but why are they producing bad content? Because they're making bad hires. They're not hiring the best person. They didn't go out and said, let me find a Star Wars nerd who's going to love this product and who's going to produce this product, but they found somebody who checked all the right DEI boxes.
Yeah.
She's
and Jason, I really want to make that point here. I don't think it has to be said. We are not saying that because you're a gay black woman working at Disney that you are the problem. I'm saying that because you hold horrible ideas, you could be a straight white male, a gay black woman. It's because of the ideas that you hold and are enforcing there. Because I know we're going to get comments in the chat or some leftist who's going to say, oh, look at these racists. Nope, not the case. I would rather have a gay black presidential candidate for the Republican Party if they held the same conservative values as I did, other than a white male, because I do not care about those characteristics. I want someone that shares my values. So I got to say that because I'm just going to cut those comments off. Don't waste my time.
Yeah, I was going to say that's probably a good point because I already see a couple dropping in, and it's yeah. I mean, if the diverse Pakistani journalist loved Star Wars and she
makes
said,
a good Star Wars movie, bring her on board.
Bring her on board. But when she's being brought in because of her check boxes and she's being brought in to further those views, then it's just going to end badly for that property.
Absolutely, Jason.
Now, Todd, we've dug a lot into equity and versus equality. Hopefully everybody understands why what the Biden administration is doing so terribly. But you touched on an interesting topic that I wanted to pivot to kind of wrap up this week's show. I started preparing tax documents this week. And Todd, what do you think about taxes?
Income tax is illegal. It is theft from the government. The IRS should be abolished. We should repeal the income tax at the federal level, state level. When it comes to taxes, I'm an anarchist, Jason.
And why is that?
Well, a couple of reasons. Number one, it's my money, and I'm happy to pay taxes, Jason. We should have a libertarian tax conversation, because if you want to have a user tax, I understand that there is a need for government. You have to have baseline levels of government to ensure certain public facilities are operating. I'm not, completely off the ranch on that one. But find a different way to collect that revenue based on who needs it, who uses it. But just because I happen to make money, you don't get access to that. That's not how this works. So on the philosophical level, there's that. But in a practical sense too, like, government is inefficient as heck. They're going to take my money and they're just going to waste it. They're going to go buy votes from someone that's not working like I am. So that's a big problem. But then they're going to fund DEI and equity initiatives that do absolute harm. They do no good. And then they're going to send it apparently to Ukraine over and over again as I write these checks to the government. So do you want me to keep going, or did I
was going to say that was kind of a fascinating thing, because you and I are both very passionate about taxes. And shout out to Jesse Guards in the chat. We're with you, Jesse. Pray for President Trump 2024. But as you look at taxes, and I was having this thing, and I'm like, oh, we should do an episode on taxes and how taxation is theft. But I just want to tell just kind of a funny story for, I think, what would wake Americans up to some of the stuff that we're talking about. So my wife and I got together. I was working in corporate America, and she was just a wage worker. She worked just a job, right? And she had never looked into taxes, other than she got her taxes done every year and paid her taxes or whatnot, but she never understood how much theft it was. And we had one year where we bought a rental house after the 2008 crash. And then my partner and I, my business partner, we bought some rental properties together. We sold it, and it was amazing. We made like $200,000 on the house. It was phenomenal. Like, we bought it at the right time. We rehabbed it. We rented it out. We upgraded. We made it really nice. We rented out for like 10 years. The market went nuts. It was in a great location by a school, and we sold it and we came out great. And then it was funny because we're sitting there and she's like, this is great. You know, hey, if we made 200,000, you both get $100,000. And we're like, this is awesome. And then it comes to the end of the year. And now you pay capital gains tax, you pay income tax, you pay all these things. By the time you walk, that 100,000 that you made, that was your half, ended up being like 60K or something. And it was funny because I was literally sitting there with my checkbook, writing a check to the U.S. Treasury for like $40,000. And she's like, I've never seen a check so big in my life, and you are writing that to send it to the federal government. And she had been with me the whole time when we bought it and rehabbed it and rented it out and dealt with all the issues and did all the things, that all the work we put into that house for the time that we owned it. And now we're entrepreneurs. We own our own business. She still works. Shout out to Jen, best wife ever. But we were starting to prepare our tax documents, and it's funny because I think if we ever wanted to get Americans to revolt, we would repeal withholding of taxes and make people write that check. Because we were looking at the numbers, and it's like, okay, so we made X amount of money. Okay, you know, not a bad year. And it's like, okay, so we're gonna owe 12.6% to the federal government, or whatever the percent is for Social Security. Oh, are we going to get any Social Security? No, we just did an episode on that a couple months ago. Like, Social Security is going to be gone. And then it was, okay, I owe 9% to the state. Wait a second. What did the state do for that? And then we owe whatever 20% to the federal government. And it's funny because when you're self-employed or an entrepreneur, you write the check to the state of Minnesota. You write the check to the U.S. Treasury. And it's just fascinating because I think if people had to sit down and write that check, it would completely blow their mind. And they'd be like, what did the federal government do to earn this money from me?
Yeah, and what are they going to do with it? And Jay, it's so funny you tell that story because I was just talking to my wife, #bestwife out there. Props and shout outs to you as well. The same exact thing. As I'm writing this check, as it's automatically withdrawn from my bank account, and we had just come from a conversation with a group of friends, and you know, the psychology behind that is so important, and don't think that's an accident there. But a lot of people say, I just want to have those automatic withdrawals so I don't have to think about it, and then I can get a refund come tax season. They think they're getting free money back from the government when they get their refund. Folks, it doesn't work like that. That is your money that was stolen from you, and they're giving your own wallet back.
Right. It's funny you say that because I do taxes for several of my buddies, and the amount of Americans that have no idea of the concept of what a tax refund is. So I'll give this assignment to the folks that are watching the podcast. Take out your paycheck and look at the federal tax withheld. And if you're paid weekly, biweekly, multiply by the number of paychecks you get a year, that's how much money the federal government is stealing from you all year long. When they have stolen too much of your money, they give you some of it back. And suddenly you feel great because we got this tax return.
That wasn't in your budget. It's extra money. That's not how this works at all. Income tax, look at FICA, the Medicare, the Social Security. You just read down what was taken out of your paycheck, folks. And if you're not angry at seeing all those different lines and percentages and dollar amounts getting stolen from you, I don't know how to help you.
Right. And it's interesting, too, because Todd talked about the inefficiency of government. So we're in the state of Minnesota. So all of a sudden, the state of Minnesota decided it was a great idea to pay for school lunches for every kid in Minnesota.
Oh, that sounds good, Jason. I don't want kids to go hungry.
All of the politicians in Minnesota, we don't want kids. Who's against feeding the children?
The evil Republicans want that kid to go hungry. How dare they?
Think about if they ate their lunch hard, and think of how much better they do in school. Actually, now that I'm saying this stuff, it might be easier to do a leftist podcast than a right podcast, because we could just get out there and code like Republicans hate hungry kids.
We could just, whatever feels good. Jason, we should write a check for $100,000 to every family in Minnesota. Everyone's a high wage earner now. This would be great.
This would be amazing. And then the first report came out on this school lunch program. And Todd, did you happen to catch how it said it was doing?
Why don't you share with? I'm going to learn with the audience right now. I'll be the proxy for all of us listening right now to see what was that first report.
Turns out it overprojected, or the government spent 20% more than their highest case budgeting that they set aside.
You don't say.
So because there are people taking advantage of the system, it turns out a lot of schools, like kids, like do infinite upgrades on their lunches. So I don't know if you got kids in school, but they can supersize it. They can whatever they want to call it. So then they blew out the budget. So then one would think a normal person would come out and say, maybe we need to put some parameters on this so that kids can't just spend unlimited money at the lunch counter. And the Republicans that proposed that, they got accused of wanting children to starve again.
Jason, I got to say this because I have worked in the public education system. Prior to doing this, I was a teacher, administrator. I've seen it all. I was an assistant principal who lived in the cafeteria for 3 hours every day while all heck broke loose at the lunch tables. I never once saw a single student go hungry. And guess what, folks? They already have free and reduced lunch forms. If you do not make a certain income level at the family, you get a free lunch provided to you already. And you want to talk about COVID money abuses there, you should dig into some of the free lunch programs that they offered during the pandemic and the lockdowns. There was a lot of money lost and a lot of money made by some sketchy folks, but never saw a single kid go hungry. We even sent brown bags full of food home to students that we knew were in situations where mom and dad might not have gone to the grocery store that week. Times were tough at home. We made sure that happened already. Jason, and I've tried this to tell this to my other teacher friends, the only reason this program was implemented because they love government power. And once you put a program in place, you don't really ever get rid of it.
Right. Nothing ever ends. So one would think that the lefties would start waking up, and especially leftist politicians would go, okay, maybe this program, we should put some brakes on it. They doubled down and they said, oh my gosh, you know what this says? This doesn't say we ran an ineffective.
More kids are hungry.
There's more hungry kids than we knew about. So we need to continue to expand and increase the programs. So
I got to put this on here, Jason, because I know I'm a radical. Pat, if you can't have kids, if you can't feed kids, don't have kids. Like, I think our soft 2023 culture would call this really harsh and unloving, but call me crazy. I think if I have kids, I need to provide for my own kids. It's not your job to write a check to the government to redistribute that to me. If I'm going to have a family, I provide for my family. And there's always exceptions. Like I said, times are tough. You lose a job. Not saying don't have any social safety nets in place. However, it is your responsibility as a parent to provide for your kid. You signed up for that.
And it's funny because part of the message that I wanted to kind of end on for this week's episode by talking about the school lunches, if you think about equity and how that's going to damage America and how we need to get strong leaders with conservative values like President Trump back in positions of power. And we need that at all levels of federal government. They want people to get jobs based on immutable characteristics, un-American, illegal, awful. They want to spread this Marxist rhetoric throughout the entire government system. That's the apparatus that we're up against. In the state of Minnesota, that is on the front line of the communists overtaking government, they want you to think as a parent, as a human, that you are not able to provide lunch for your kids. And the only way, the only solution to that is to let government feed my kids. And folks, if you are so weak-minded to think that it's right to hire people based on immutable characteristics, that you can't provide lunch for your own kids, if enough people think like that, this country's lost. America will not look the same at the end of this.
Jason, absolutely. It's an evil philosophy. What it does is it dehumanizes your entire existence there. Suddenly, there's, like you said with the college story, there's no reason for anyone to have to work hard anymore or struggle or have challenges and feel that achievement, because what's the motivation? Why am I going to work hard? So you have dampened, and I'll go back to public school. I know we're hitting our hour here. What happens in schools right now is that all of the smart kids, the bright kids, the accelerated kids, they sit there all day while we wait for equity to work and for all the kids to catch up to them. You have just crushed the achieving, naturally intelligent kids. And this is not an indictment against the ones that need a little extra help. We're all made differently. But you are setting people up for failure and misery if you promote equity, because all these people get lost in the weeds there. You are telling everyone that it doesn't matter what you do, who you are, because we have a program in place that's going to take care of you. It is an utterly dehumanizing way of looking at the world, and it is designed to crush your spirits intentionally so that government can control you and feed your kid and teach your kid and write you a UBI check so you don't have to go worry about work. If that's the existence you want to sign up for and have no free will and no ambition, vote Democrat right now. If that's not the case, have this conversation and share this podcast with people that are open-minded and saying, I don't like the direction this country is headed.
And that probably brings up last note, and then I'll turn to you to close this out. But folks, 2024, we're going to face a pivotal turning point in America where the very foundation of what, how, and why we do things is under attack in ways we never imagined. The fact that Joe Biden could pass a racist piece of legislation on day one about equity, and I'll be honest, most people watching didn't even know he did that. The media should have been screaming about that, because if we had an honest media, they can see how destructive it is. They can see it's racist. They can see all the things that are wrong with that program. Until we wake up all Americans and understand how awful this is and what the government's doing in overreach. If you're from Minnesota, there's a friend of yours that thinks that the government doing school lunch is a good idea. Folks, we need to change minds. We need to wake them up and saying, like, are you telling me you think so little of your average citizen that they can't feed their kids? And that's why we ask you to support our work at the American Tribune. Go to theamericantribune.com. Go to theamericantribune.news. You can read some of our deep dives. Like I mentioned earlier, there's some great Epstein stuff on there. We'll put out a great Pizzagate article. You can either do free subscription or you can do a paid subscription, support what we do. But most importantly, share this content and share it not just with people you agree with, but share this with people you don't agree with and say, hey, give these guys a chance. They made some good points here. We've done episodes on everything from ethanol subsidies to Social Security to equity and equality this week. And we do this because we think these are the foundational principles we need to get back to if we're going to save this country. So thanks to all of you that listen. Please give us a like, comment, and share. And thanks for supporting our work. And with that, over to Todd.
All right, Jason, I don't know how else to wrap this up of it. I'm going to throw out a bomb here and let people think about it. Equity is rooted in resentment and jealousy, and they hate to see people be happy and successful. That is all it is. I will die on that hill. And then let us know in the comments if you want to have this conversation again next week, because I'm happy to have it. Nothing good comes from equity. If that's the only takeaway from the show today, thanks for listening. And like Jason said, have a great weekend, and we will see you next week.
See you next Friday.